It has been over a year now, but what we can say, especially regarding the most recent developments, is that more than a year after the start of Russia's invasion against Ukraine, Ukraine is even better capable of defending itself. And here, of course, with the vital contribution of Western military aid, I would just like to mention the importance of the Patriot system, whereby now Kiev in particular is able to fend off attacks from Russian missiles, because we remember at the very beginning of the war, Russia totally dominated the Ukrainian airspace, whereas now we can see that Ukraine can defend itself against random Russian attacks, which may provide a semblance of greater security and normality for the future, so that also the reconstruction process can start safer in the knowledge that better protection can be ensured. Also, another piece of good news coming out of the recently held G7 summit is the agreed provision of F-16 fighter jets to Ukraine, which is another important component in Ukraine's defense of its airspace. So we can say that 1 year on, Ukraine is in a better position. Yes, indeed, we held an international conference on the 19th of May here in Sofia. It was entitled Central and Eastern Europe on the Front Lines, Forging Collaborative Solutions to Foreign Authoritarian State influence, and we brought here to Bulgaria leading international experts from across Europe and America to start a cross-regional dialogue on how to best counter Russian and Chinese influence in Central and Eastern Europe. And first of all, we aimed at exchanging perspectives on the historically inherited and also contemporary challenges of Russian and Chinese influence, particularly disinformation, in the three major sub-regions of Europe, and in particular Central and Eastern Europe, so the Baltic countries, also the Central European states, and Southeast Europe. Our second major aim was focused on identifying best practices, but also remaining gaps in terms of countering Russian and Chinese media influence in the region. And last but not least, we also put forward concrete proposals and initiatives for a collaborative tackling of Beijing's and Moscow's influence activities in Central and Eastern Europe. So I would really like to underscore exactly the importance of having an international collaborative network of experts and think tanks from across the region who can jointly provide solutions to and also tackle Russian and Chinese influence, which can happen in a number of ways, including through the exchange of information, also best practices on the level of civil society, in government, conducting joint advocacy initiatives, and forging a closer dialogue between experts, but also policymakers concerned with tackling Russian and Chinese influence in the region. A very interesting question, because this was something that we focused a lot on during the conference. So, on the one hand, of course, we have seen that there has been a significant degree of conjunction and even coordination of Russian and Chinese diplomatic activities and also disinformation campaigns. But also a lot of our panelists called for also being attentive to the distinctions between Russian and Chinese influence operations. So we in particular paid a lot of attention to the fact that, of course, Russia has historically been the major aggressive actor in Central and Eastern Europe, which has interfered in the domestic politics and also in the international relations of the countries in this area of Europe. Whereas, of course, China is a much more recent actor here, and it has exercised influence, particularly in the economies of Central and East European countries. So, those differences in the origins, duration, and also scope and instruments of Russian and Chinese influence means that we need to be attentive to also the particular targets of Beijing's and Moscow's disinformation campaigns in particular. So we focused, for example, on the Baltic countries and the target groups of Russian and Chinese disinformation there. And we have seen that Moscow tends to target the Russian-speaking communities and also the socially and economically vulnerable groups, which is, of course, a trend that applies not only to the Baltics, but also to the rest of Central and Eastern Europe, whereas China tends to target business communities and also academic communities. So it is important to underline that this is part of China's overall strategy of establishing a significant footprint in the academic institutions of Central and Eastern Europe, and also trying to make inroads, of course, in the economies and the business communities. And so I would like to stress here the responses also to Chinese influence, and in particular, and we discussed the Lithuanian example, which is, of course, an example demonstrating to the whole of Europe, but I would say also the world, how a country can deal with the economically coercive practices of Beijing, which followed after 2021 when Lithuania decided to establish a representative office of Taiwan, that is to say, a de facto embassy, which led to China's economic retaliation, blocking bilateral trade, and also imposing secondary sanctions. So here we emphasized the importance of economic partnerships within Euro-Atlantic community, because the United States and Taiwan stepped in and provided important economic support to Lithuania, whereas the European Union also sued China and the WTO for discriminatory trade practices. So, in terms of the responses, it is important to have a strategic collaboration among the like-minded countries in Euro-Atlantic community in order to be able to stave off some of the negative ramifications of China's economic coercion.